Let's take a look at the Outback Bowl in Tampa, Florida, where Indiana's play at Ole Miss. Indiana, a 6.5-point favorite with a total of 67. Indiana coming in second in the Big Ten East at 6-1. Ole Miss, fifth in the SEC West, coming in at 4-5. Interesting matchup here for me. This is, first of all, let me just say, I wish this were a matchup in which Michael Penix were not injured for Indiana. I actually think the point spread would be a lot higher if that were the case. I think that's why we're looking at about a touchdown spread in this game. Indiana coming in averaging 30 points on offense, only 103 on the ground, 258 in the air, whereas Ole Miss is allowing 40 points per game, 211 rushing yards allowed per game, over 300 in the air. And the strength of that Indiana offense lies in the passing game, which we're going to most likely get Jack Tuttle leading the offense with Penix being out now. Offensively for Ole Miss, averaging 40 points per game, over 200 yards on the ground, 344 in the air. Offense is not the problem for Ole Miss, but they're playing into a strength of Indiana, only allowing 135 yards per game on the ground, 225 in the air. That Indiana defense has been able to make plays. They have been able to turn the offenses over that they have played. That could be a problem for Ole Miss and Matt Corral, who has thrown several interceptions this year. He's thrown 27 touchdown passes. He's run for 4. He's rushed for over 460 yards. He's thrown for nearly 3,000 yards. But the interception is his Achilles heel, and that could be a problem here. But before I go ahead and make my picks, let's go ahead and take a look at the fantasy matchups for Indiana. I mentioned Jack Tuttle most likely going to get the start. Only 2 touchdown passes this year. Michael Penix has taken this team a long way, and Indiana comes in fresh off of a 14-6 win at Wisconsin to end the regular season. Their only loss this year was to Ohio State, the 42-35 game that came down to the end. Indiana with a nice comeback, but came up just short on the road against the Buckeyes. Stevie Scott, the leading rusher for Indiana. He's got 137 attempts, 462 yards, 8 touchdowns. His yards per game, his yards per carry, not incredibly impressive, but I would think going against Ole Miss's defense, this will be the weakest defense I would say that the Hoosiers will probably face all year long. And so I think Scott has potential, particularly with Penix being out, excuse me, and they ride him heavily in this matchup, has potential to be his best game of the year. Receivers, Indiana's not short of talent. Ty Freifogel, 34 receptions, 687 yards, 7 touchdowns. Whop Philliar, 36 receptions, 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Peyton Hendershot, tight end, 23 receptions. He's got 4 touchdowns. And then you can't forget about Miles Marshall as well. He's got 17 receptions for 257 yards. So Indiana does have some playmakers in the passing game, and they figure to come into play right here in this matchup against Ole Miss that's allowing over 300 yards passing per game. That makes Jack Tuttle a deep horse sleeper fantasy-wise in this matchup for me. Because if Indiana still struggles to run the ball against this bad Ole Miss defense, we know that they have the weapons in place for Tuttle to make plays in the passing game. For me, on the Indiana side offensively, this game has all the makings for Stevie Scott to have his best fantasy game of the 2020 season. But for me, the dark sleeper in this matchup could be Jack Tuttle, if Indiana really doesn't get the running game going as much as I think that they could have potential to do, and they stick to their guns to what they've been all season, and that is more of a predominant passing team when it comes to efficiency. And quite honestly, it's the vertical threat. I mean, you look at the yards per catch, Freifogel, Whop Philliar, Peyton Hendershot, well, not Peyton Hendershot, but the receivers, Whop Philliar and Ty Freifogel, averaging a lot more than 10 yards per catch. Those guys are making plays downfield, and so that's what it'll come to. Can Tuttle get them the ball downfield? For me, the safest option fantasy-wise is going to be Stevie Scott. Maybe in a PPR league, it would be like Freifogel or Whop Philliar. But for me, I think the dark horse sleeper, the guy that has a tremendous upside in this matchup based on just what we've seen in such a small sample size, could be Jack Tuttle. We'll keep an eye on that one. Over on the Ole Miss side, we know what we're going to get. We're going to get Matt Corral. We're going to get a ton of passing yards. We're going to get You should get points from Ole Miss. Whether or not Corral turns the ball over, for me, is what's going to determine this matchup and how this matchup plays out. No, Ole Miss is going to score points. They've got between Jerry and Ely, Snoop Connor, the emergence of Henry Parrish down the stretch. I mean, those guys can do more than enough, and that's more than the weapons needed in this matchup for Ole Miss in the backfield. Where they're going to suffer, where Ole Miss is going to suffer, is the loss of Elijah Moore, the loss of Kenny Yeboah. Both of those guys have opted out, declared. So now you're looking at Braylon Sanders, maybe Jonathan Mingo, Dontario Drummond, maybe even a dark horse Casey Kelly at tight end, who's taken over for Kenny Yeboah. Maybe he has a breakout game. But I think that pass defense of Indiana is the strength of their defense. So the fact that Ole Miss is going into this matchup with really a revamped receiving core. You take away Yeboah, you take away Elijah Moore, you're taking away most of the Ole Miss receivers. Will there be enough time for Corral and these receivers to really gel, be on the same page? I think there'll be enough time to prepare. Obviously, this game is on January 2nd, so that's a huge break. It's not like they're playing an early bowl game, so they've got time to get Sanders and Mingo on the same page with Corral and really come up with a game plan. But I think that Indiana defense, if they show up, going to present more of a problem for Matt Corral. So I think Ole Miss may lean on their backs a little more, not only in the running game, but to get them the ball out of the backfield. When you look at Ely and you look at Connor, and even Parrish, I mean, you're talking about 30 combined receptions from those guys. So I think they're going to find a way to get the backs into the passing game now that Elijah Moore and Kenny Yeboah have opted out. I still think this is going to be a tough order for Ole Miss, even though I like their offense. I think they're going to be able to score points, but I'm worried about them turning the ball over. That's been the MO for both of these teams. Ole Miss has turned it over. Indiana has created turnovers. I don't see any reason why things would change in this game. So I do think there's going to be points. I think Indiana's going to score because Ole Miss's defense is bad, but I think Ole Miss is still going to be able to put up some points on Indiana. That's why I think Tuttle is a dark horse fantasy play in this matchup. I like Stevie Scott to have his best fantasy game. I like Indiana to win this game. I still think 6.5 points is a lot. I like Ole Miss's offense to score points. This is one of those matchups where I could see Indiana really putting the clamps down and really making this a 2 or 3 score game. But I'm going to pick Indiana to win, and I'm going to pick for Ole Miss to show up and play and have a good game and to cover the 6.5 points. And I think this game barely gets over the total of 67. So give me Indiana to win the game, Ole Miss in the points, and I'll go over the total of 67 in this matchup.